Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I'm going to go get my sermon. I guess it's one of those nights. I always find it strange that we gather for worship each and every year here on Ash Wednesday, and really every Sunday or Saturday that we come together for worship, to do the exact opposite of what Jesus is telling us here in Matthew's Gospel. Ever noticed that? We just heard Jesus say, "Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them. Whenever you give alms, don't let one hand know what the other is doing. Do it in secret. And when you pray, don't stand and pray in the synagogues or churches, or pray out in public. Instead, go into a room and close the door behind you and do it in secret. And when you fast, don't look dismal. Instead, put oil on your heads." Yet here we are in church, dropping our offerings into the plate as it's passed by, so at least the ushers and their neighbors can see it. And here we gather to stand and pray before one another, lifting our hands into the air. Oh, who am I kidding? We Lutherans don't go that far, but we'll stand there. And here we are getting ready not to put oil on our heads, but instead to rub this dark cross across our foreheads for everyone to see. I guess at least it's late enough in the day that most of us will probably just go straight home and wash it off. Whereas if it were earlier in the day and we went out in the public, everyone would see it. They would stare at you and come up to you sometimes and say, "Hey, you got something on your, oh, is that today? Oh, yeah." Like I said, this always feels like such a disconnect, hearing this teaching from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, while we gather to do many of the things he seems to be condemning. Sometimes this whole season of Lent feels like a disconnect to the life of discipleship and faith to which Jesus calls us, especially in those times when we try to out-Lent each other. I'm sure you've never been a part of that, right? When someone says, "Oh, you only gave up chocolate, I gave up bread." "Oh yeah, well, I gave up coffee. Well, I don't want to be around you this month." Oh yeah, well, I gave up sleeping. And I wonder how often we miss the point. I wonder how often we forget to ask ourselves or think about why we're doing what we're doing. I wonder how often we contain these practices or this intentionality only to the season of Lent, instead of letting it become a part of who we are always. But let me be clear from the get-go, doing these things that I named above is not a bad thing. Don't be going home and telling everybody, Pastor Stephen said we don't have to give up anything for Lent or put anything in the offering plate, and we don't have to go to church anymore. I'm not saying that. I'm also not saying that you have to give up something for Lent. That's your own personal practice. But instead, before I confuse myself and you all anymore, what I'm trying to say is that we're not meant to do any of those things because we think they're expected from us, or because the world said that's what a faithful church person needs to do, or because we're seeking praise from God or an ultimate reward for ourselves. Instead, we try to do these things because living a holy life will bring about a closer relationship to that God who sees in secret, which, as Jesus says, is reward enough for us. The season of Lent is not something to be accomplished in and of itself. The season is truly meant to set us up to know what the rest of the year and the rest of our lives is supposed to be for. Because when we talk about a reward in this life of faith, I hope we've realized that this means something completely different in God's kingdom than it does in the world around us. This kind of reward means that our lives are turned inside out. This kind of reward looks like a life of generosity instead of a life trying to line our own pockets. It looks like a life of less instead of a life of more. It looks like living in the uncomfortable places instead of hiding in our own safety and comfort. It looks like preparing for the best of times instead of fearing the worst. Lent is not about feeling holy, but about a lifelong commitment that helps us hold on to the things that sustain us. And that kind of life and holiness can begin or be rebuilt or remembered here. In a little bit, we're going to be invited into the discipline of Lent. Prayer and confession, remembering who and whose we are. And then, as we do every year, we have that opportunity to receive the sign of the cross on our forehead with ashes. Those ashes are a reminder of our sinful nature and our human mortality, while at the same time, the sign of the cross is the sustaining hope of new life that's reborn from those ashes. I had a chance to witness this kind of rebirth here recently. So the thing with living in town and working across the street from where you live means that I don't get out a whole lot. And so when I am able to get out and have to go drive somewhere, I often notice around me how the fields and the grasslands around us will sometimes get burned. You can see that charring across the whole landscape. But it wasn't until just a few days ago that I actually got to drive by a field that was actively being burned. First time. And so I know that some people have a fear of any kind of fire, and there are probably some who don't see a benefit to that kind of large-scale burning. But those who do appreciate a benefit see old brush and debris burned away. They see weeds reduced or nutrients added back to the soil. They witness space and opportunity for seeds that are buried deep within the soil to be able to come to the surface and bloom and flourish. And as I saw that, I was thinking that the same could probably be said for these ashes we're using tonight. As I was telling the kids earlier, you know these ashes are from the palm branches that were used at the previous Palm Sunday. They're the branches we waved in the air to remember and celebrate Jesus as the one who lives and reigns for us and for all the world. Those branches were the ones used to welcome Jesus into Jerusalem, as he then proceeded to his earthly death. Palm branches that are dried, burned, and crushed into the ash we use tonight. So maybe this ash this evening can be an invitation to ask ourselves some questions. Like, what are the things in our lives that we wish to burn away? Maybe it's things that bring hurt and pain and division that we could give up and give to God instead of refraining from the things we actually enjoy this Lent. Because we hear that God promises that those things that burden and break us, well, they can be gone like in a flash. Suddenly we have room in our lives for hope and newness and rebirth. Suddenly we can see ourselves as a new and redeemed creation of God's own hand. So again, I wonder if we get too caught up in wanting to do things right instead of seeing how this right behavior we're called to will bring us closer to God and more clearly able to see what God is doing among us and within us. We've been marked as God's people, God's own children. So take this invitation and let us enter into this season with a posture of humbleness and openness so that we can again see how God will burn away the old so that new life and new light can spring forth. So blessings on your Lenten journey. Amen.